Might Duet Night Abyss give us everything we wanted from a gacha game? Pan Studio invited me to take part in their second closed beta test and sponsored this video, and I'm so happy to have had the chance to give it a try. So far, I'm genuinely impressed. DNA is a gacha RPG with hybrid action combat, with dizzying scope for player expression, an intriguing story mechanic where your dialogue choices have an actual effect on your interactions with the world, and so many of the quality of life features that the wider community have been begging for years. And they also seem to have a dev team who acknowledge issues, listen to feedback, and quickly change things for the better. The progress they've made since the first beta test a mere 3 months ago is staggering. This will, of course, be my unbiased perspective on my experience with the game. If you like the sound of it and would like to try out the game, you can support my channel and the game by pre-registering and following the DNA accounts on Twitter and YouTube through the links down below. I only had a couple of days to play, so remember these are very much first impressions, and since this is a beta, the in-game footage does not represent the final quality of the game. Let's start with the biggest positives, then the parts which caught my attention the most, and finish off with a couple of things I feel like they could improve, and the proof of just how much they've revamped the game already. The combat in Duet Night Abyss is fast, frenetic, and just a ton of fun. The movement stands out right from the first moment. There is no stamina, and instead the key mechanics are a helix leap, where you slide along the ground then launch yourself into the air, plus double jump, slide, dodge, and wall jump. This feels incredibly fluid. While I've seen people play third-person PvP shooters with movement which looks similar to this, I've never played them personally and was surprised at just how good it feels and how quickly it became quite natural. And the actual fighting feels the same. Each character has melee attacks which feel powerful and satisfying to use, along with a skill and an ultimate to provide unique abilities and elemental attacks, and they all have a ranged weapon too. And you absolutely need to make good use of them all, because good lord, this game throws a ton of enemies at you. I'm used to other games where the enemies spawn in smaller groups and it can get a little annoying to chase them down, but in DNA they come by the dozen and they all flood towards you in endless waves. And the skills and ults don't have cooldowns. Instead, they consume a shared sanity resource which recharges via combat. This provides a much looser limit on what the character can do when, which feels freeing without ruining the balance. It's just unapologetically fun to play. And while button smashing hack and slash seems to be a valid tactic early on, the complexity of the character builds hints that there may be room for strategy and difficult content later on, and it's possible that team building may become important too. Another way the combat stands out is that you only control one character at a time, but can summon up to 2 other characters onto the field, where they are controlled by AI which assists you in battle, though that AI probably needs a little work. All of this adds up to exactly the balance I'm hoping for. A fun, easy, engaging experience at first, which reveals its depths over time. Let's hope they get that right. Interestingly, any character can equip any weapon: sword, katana, claymore, polearm, and more. There are no restrictions. From what I can tell, this means that the attack animations for each weapon type are shared across all the characters, but they do look surprisingly natural, likely because of the speed of movement and the slight motion blur applied. You might assume that this makes the characters feel fairly similar, but I don't think it does. Their skills and ultimates of course make each one feel unique, and the attack and reach of weapons is altered depending on the character's weapon mastery types, which adds a little nuance too. The variety available in the guns is impressive too. Since the game has a science fantasy setting, they've been able to add a ton of unique mechanics to different ones, and many of the more powerful ones have interesting pros and cons, and they all feel satisfying to play. A minor problem I encountered was that I genuinely didn't notice I was taking damage until I was about to die each time. Maybe I'm just not noticing any visual indicators that might exist, but so far I definitely wished for some more significant feedback when you're hit. The enemies regularly drop health potions when they die, however, so while I had to scramble to stay alive a few times, I rarely actually died. This may also be partially due to the explosion of damage numbers which constantly fills the screen, since they do make it hard to figure out what the heck is going on half the time. I also feel like the combat might benefit from some more depth to the enemies themselves. It's possible that this already exists further into the game, but in the early areas the enemies feel fairly mundane, and the battles are essentially just a power fantasy with you slicing through the hordes. This is a very fun experience so far, but I suspect that it might end up getting less engaging over time, and throwing in some enemies with more detailed mechanics might spice things up a bit, and the same applies to boss mechanics. Since I'm perhaps not the most combat-oriented person in the first place, it's unclear to me how much skill expression there will be via the combat and where the ceiling is. I suspect the key is effective use of character kits and team combinations, combined with the right weapons and demon wedges, as well as mastering movement while paying attention to enemy weaknesses. I'm a bit too early on into the game to have a feel for that yet, but I can't wait to dive deeper. Overall, the combat has been a blast so far, and I'm excited to see what more they do with it. From what I've seen, the level of depth and control we have over our character and team builds is awesome. There are so many different dimensions to a character's build, with multiple categories of equipment, different ways to level or customize that equipment, and surprisingly creative and innovative items which have innovative effects on how characters function that I've never encountered in other games. I've barely scratched the surface of what DNA has to offer here, but it's pretty clear that these systems are designed to be forgiving for those who prefer to set and forget, and really satisfying for those who want to tinker to their heart's content. One interesting nuance is that while any character can equip any weapon, most do get a bonus for equipping certain weapon types which they have an affinity with. A nice way to nudge people towards using the most appropriate weapon for each character while keeping that unprecedented freedom. The starting point is, of course, the base leveling system for your character, their melee weapon, and their ranged weapon. These work much as you'd expect, with the typical ascension system which locks further improvement until you collect some special materials. Each character also has 3 skills you can level: damage, buff, and passive, plus a couple of extra bonuses you can unlock once each skill reaches a certain level. And, of course, characters and weapons also have extra abilities unlocked via duplicates in the gacha or crafting systems called introns and smelting. These are familiar foundations, and there isn't anything unexpected here. The first area where DNA's build system really sets itself apart is demon wedges, the sub-equipment or accessory system. At first glance, they're similar to what we've seen in other games, upgrades which you equip to different slots, each of which provides a stat buff to improve your character's combat or traversal abilities, plus there are also bonuses for equipping wedges for matching sets. There are several slots which you can equip demon wedges into, separately on each character, their melee weapon and their ranged weapon. There's a tolerance system which limits the total combined level of wedges you can equip, but for the most part, the main restriction is that each wedge you collect is equipable on either characters or weapons. Each wedge can be leveled up, raising the strength of the stat boost it provides, and leveling does not include any RNG at all. The only randomness is in the farming phase. When you level a wedge, you get a predetermined stat boost, so the pain of layers of chance and endless re-rolling just does not exist. And in addition to the typical direct stat upgrades you might be used to, wedges can also provide innovative boosts which make more significant changes to a character's gameplay. For example, by increasing the range of AoE skills or adding damage to helix leaps directly so that you have an extra source of DPS. This is a genius idea which should unlock so much potential for customizing and improving your characters. And every single character has 3 loadouts each for their main character wedges, their melee weapon wedges, and their ranged weapon wedges, which can be stored and swapped between at will. And wedges can be used across multiple characters or weapons. Next, Geniemon, little creatures which you can befriend in the world and summon to help you in battle. Each Geniemon has a passive buff and an active skill which you can activate in battle, which can provide extra damage, heal your characters, or apply further buffs to your character. They also have a level up system which improves the strength of their abilities. And again, there is further depth here. Each Geniemon has empty slots into which you can merge other Geniemon to combine the passes of up to 4 creatures into one. Also, you can name them. I am so going to get overly attached to these little minions. I love it when games mix together different takes on character build systems, and it's refreshing to see extra layers built into each one. Again, the potential for much greater strategic depth is very obvious, especially once you start combining buffs across all of these different surface areas. And finally, we also have the Tactical Backpack. This is a feature-rich shortcut wheel which contains up to 24 slots in total across 3 pages. Currently, you can equip consumables, health, ammo, or revives, emotes, or sigils which perform specific actions, and you can equip support characters so you can quickly summon different teammates to assist you in battle. Say, for example, you have your main character who you're currently using on field, and you have 4 support characters you want to use them with: a healer, a shielder, and 2 DPS characters. But, of course, you can only have 2 supports at once. In other games, swapping between different teams is a tedious process. Thanks to the characters being available in the shortcut wheel, in DNA you can quickly swap them in at the click of a button. In certain situations, this feature is restricted. For example, during commissions or certain challenges, you cannot dismiss your supports once you've deployed them. But I think that restriction makes sense in those limited cases, and the utility this provides during exploration in particular is just great. There's also tons of potential for this in the future. For example, I could imagine other consumables being very useful, such as mines, tripwires, and so on, to provide further depth and creativity to the combat. And of course, the game has 3 loadout slots for the backpack because sometimes we can have nice things. I would be unsurprised if there are more build systems which I simply didn't notice, but what DNA has so far looks pretty amazing. Each system has breadth and depth without the RNG which plagues the competition, and even a cursory understanding makes it clear that there's a ton of potential here. They cater to more casual players through things like the auto-equip feature, but I suspect that dedicated players are just going to love figuring out a ton of different builds. And, of course, what is a gacha RPG without its exploration? The world is gorgeous, with that cel-shaded aesthetic which I personally never get tired of, and even though it's not open world, it certainly feels expansive. The setting is an eclectic mix of fantasy, steampunk, and sci-fi. The areas I've explored so far are very monochrome due to there being snowy regions, but there's a lot of beauty here already, and I'm curious to see more diverse biomes. Interestingly, while there is no stamina system, there's actually no way to run in the first place, and you can only briefly sprint up walls. You can dash at a faster speed by using the dodge button, but the best way to explore is by chaining slides and helix leaps. They're surprisingly satisfying and flexible for traversal, and overall the exploration had a nice balance between freedom and restriction. I did occasionally find myself wishing for a glider or the ability to sprint, but that was less common than I'd have expected. The world is scattered with enemies, puzzles, challenges, and so on. I didn't have time to truly get into the exploration aspect, so I'm not sure yet where the game lands in terms of distribution of points of interest, diversity of rewards, and that all-important chaining of related iterations of exploration gameplay loops. What I've seen so far looks polished, and despite the locations all being part of the same snowy landscape, each area still managed to feel distinct. The gacha system is another area where Pan Studio have clearly been listening to what the gacha community wants. Every limited character banner provides a 100% guarantee copy of the featured character on your first attempt, and it's only for further duplicates that the 50-50 system kicks in. While a complete lack of 50-50s would be ideal, this honestly feels like the perfect compromise. Weapons are always 100% guaranteed as well, and 5-star weapons are confirmed to be craftable within the game. You need first unlock a weapons blueprint from some secret covert missions, and then collect the materials to forge it. It'll be interesting to see how generous they are with the materials you use to create them. And they even paid attention to the little details too. Each banner's page shows exactly how far you are from hard pity, so you'll never have to faff around with opening your pull history and counting how many pages since you last got a 5-star. The information is simply there when you need it without any fuss. Obviously, the game's generosity depends entirely on how many pulls we gain through playing, so it's impossible to truly evaluate right now, but these systems are far more player-friendly than the competition and remove some of the biggest problems with existing gacha games. I'm so glad to see a game actually take this step and add these things people have been crying out for years. Unfortunately, I didn't have enough time to get too deep into the story, but it has an intriguing setup so far. The game has twin narratives where you pick one main character in the first chapter, then pick a second MC later on, and then alternate between the two to experience the central conflict from both sides of the story. This is an interesting twist on the usual pick your MC approach, which has a lot of potential. I do find it a little odd that the MC isn't actually playable at all, and instead you only play as gacha characters during combat. This may be a clever way to sidestep the issue of MC power level, or perhaps they're still working on the MC's kit. From the first couple of hours, I'd say the main quests have the ingredients for an interesting story, but are a little let down by inconsistent pacing. The opening sequence zooms past and throws so much at you that it can be a little hard to follow at times, and then there's a slightly confusing transition to the rest of the game, and the moment you reach the main city of the first region, the pacing suddenly slows a ton. Despite all that, it's still looking promising. However, I'm very happy to see people wary of the MC right from the start, and there are several story hooks which make me curious to find out more. There is also a skip button for the dialogue. I'm hoping they track how often people use it and have their narrative team aim to reduce that number as far as humanly possible, but I definitely prefer for the story to get a little polished so that it doesn't feel tempting to use it. I do wish they'd let us speed up the dialogue a little though, since while the voices are generally quite good, the delivery is a little too slow at times. And one aspect of it, which I think looks really interesting, is the impressions system. You regularly pick between different dialogue choices, which add points to a different aspect of your personality, which then have an effect on how NPCs react to you, open up quests, and even unlock special shop items. Your points influence dice roll checks for success or failure in some dialogue sequences too, hinting that in this game, your dialogue choices actually matter. Depending on how well that's done, this could be an absolute game changer. Gacha main characters are often a little bland because many want them to be self-inserts. The reason this rarely works for me is that they end up with no character at all. Being able to roleplay and have it affect the story itself would finally make this an MC who feels alive. Overall, it's a positive start, and with a few tweaks here and there, it could be an absolutely fantastic opening. One detail I really appreciate is the diversity of the characters and the level of customization available. There are already 22 characters available, 5 of which are men and a little boy as well. And interestingly, at least 2 of the playable characters seem like actual antagonists based on what I've experienced so far. I particularly love Truffle and Filbert, an adorable little princess with a giant pig companion who she rides to battle while the pig kicks out at nearby enemies. I love to see a game with enough confidence to be a little silly at times. Kezo also looks particularly cool in a more serious way, and some of the others look awesome as well. At first glance, their clothing looked a little lower quality than I had expected, but after zooming closer in the menus, I realized that their models do have an impressive level of detail, that they look fantastic when you're up close. It looks like they just enforce a fairly aggressive lower level of detail when the camera is further away. I'd also love for their clothes to have more natural movement, since they sometimes look a little stiff. I think they'll look fantastic once the game comes out of beta. And one of my favorite features in the game currently is the coloring system. It allows you to freely customize the color of all weapons in the game, so any of them can match their character's design, and the handful of premium character skins are fully customizable too. I do have slight reservations about its current implementation. I'd love for all of the original skins to be customizable too, and I can imagine it being a bit frustrating to have to pay for the dyes every time you want to recolor everything. However, the people who care the most about character aesthetics are likely to be the ones who buy skins, and this may just be an early implementation of the feature, so there's no way to know how it will look in the final version. As is, the customization options look fantastic, and I loved being able to try this out. And of course, it wouldn't be a beta test without some technical issues. I'm including this to emphasize just how fantastically well the game ran. In the modern world, it's common for games to launch with serious technical issues, but for me, DNA was incredibly smooth at all times and ran without a hiccup even when there were 50 or more enemies swarming towards me. The problems I had were entirely due to my preference for using a controller rather than a keyboard and mouse. From what I've gathered, controller support was added only recently, and I'd expect any problems to be ironed out before release. I had some issues where the controls would lock up and stop working. There were some menus where multiple actions were bound to the same button. Some instructions only showed the keys and not the controller buttons, and there's one button combination which I was constantly pressing by accident during battle, which popped up the tutorial menu. Whenever I got stuck, a quick restart fixed everything, and aside from that, I had zero issues at all. It is worth noting that I do have a powerful gaming PC, and I have no clue how well the game runs on mobile, so if you have lower specs or prefer mobile gaming, I'd recommend trying it out for yourself. And based on what I've seen of the comparisons between the first and second beta test, I trust that the devs will do a fantastic job at fixing these kinds of problems. A few days ago, they hosted a live stream covering some of the details of what they've been focusing on in between the first beta 3 months ago and the second one. For example, they put a lot of work into enhancing the visual design of the world, and the results are amazing. Right now, the world looks utterly stunning, with truly spectacular backdrops and gorgeous aesthetics in general. They also did a great job of adjusting the enemy spawn placement and density. The battles right now feel very fun, and the enemy behavior is one of the biggest reasons for that. These before and after shots from the dev stream are awesome to see, and I can't wait to see how much they can improve the rest of the game given some more time to focus on things. Duet Night Abyss has so much potential. The gameplay is dynamic and fun, there's tons of scope for depth in character builds, and the devs are giving us so many of the things we've always wanted. More than I've even had the chance to cover here. I didn't even mention Sand Realm Meditation, a customizable training ground for character testing and combat practice, for example. While there is always room for improvement, the game is in great shape overall, and I just wish I had more than a couple of days to experience it before making this video. I'll absolutely keep playing when I have the time, and I can't wait to see what they'll have cooked up by the time the game is ready for release. I can wholeheartedly recommend pre-registering through the link in the description. This game deserves all the attention it can get. Until next time!